The Wes Penra Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The Second Level of Learning. http://wespenry.com. Appendix A, Paper Number 2. Updates on the Remarkable Michael Lee Hill Case Part 2. The World Teacher of the New Era. By Wes Penra, Saturday, November 17, 2012. http://wespenry.com. Part 1. 1. How much does the government know? Let's start Part 2 with having Michael Lee Hill introduce his sightings to us. Here is a report, posted and broadcast in November 2010, and it was run by CNN 19 Action News, about the lights he had been filming much earlier. It's a 3-part video, but each section is only 2 minutes long or so, and it is a great introduction to what is to come. http://ireport.cnn.com/docs/doc-5186332. This CNN site also lets you follow links to YouTube sites, where the reader can explore this phenomenon some more if they like. As we can see, there is an abundance of reports and information regarding this. Also, here is a compilation of the best video clips and news reports of Michael's sightings, called Best of Lake Erie UFOs. Appearing all over America. Proof is in the news. HD. So far, we have concentrated our investigation on what is happening in the Lake Erie area, but wouldn't it be interesting to see if similar phenomena have happened somewhere else in the world? Or is Lake Erie unique with its dancing orbs, moving themselves into position, forming triangular structures and such? To start with, wouldn't it be nice to know how much the government know about these UFOs that they often are so quick at explaining away as military experiments, illusions, etc.? In fact, we do know a few things about how much the government knows. First of all, we know that they are aware of that the Lake Erie UFO orb phenomenon is not local for the Great Lake, and secondly, we know that they have been hiding their knowledge about these kinds of UFOs from the public for quite a long time. How do we know that? We know, because in 2006, the British Ministry of Defence, MOD, released some classified UFO files to the public, which can be viewed here. http://www.mod.uk/defenceinternet/freedom of information/publications/sehem/search publication scheme/unidentified real phenome now apint hukair defense region.htm. When we open up the link, the best thing we are perhaps expecting to find is some general UFO document that doesn't say much, just like it usually is when the government releases information of this nature. However, when opening up the first PDF file, the image hits us right in the face. It's the exact same orbs that have been sighted, photographed and filmed over Lake Erie. http://www.mod.uk/nr/rdon/7D2B110-58883-A-883-A-hyphen 45E-A-hyphen 8830-600546E7520/UAP_exec_summary_. So the phenomenon is not isolated only to the Great Lakes. And moreover, we can see that there has been a big cover-up in the United States regarding the orbs over Lake Erie, where so-called experts have expressed their informed opinions about that this can be, when in fact, their knowledge on the subject was there all the time. Instead, they try to make reliable witnesses look like fools. In the MOD report it says, amongst a lot of other things that are indeed noteworthy, that unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP or UFO, exist is indisputable. Credited with the ability to hover, land, take off, accelerate to astonishing velocities and vanish. They can reportedly alter their direction of flight suddenly and clearly can exhibit aerodynamics characteristics well beyond those of any known aircraft or missile, either manned or unmanned. The conditions for the initial formation and sustaining of what are apparently buoyant charged masses, of plasma, which can form, separate, merge, hover, climb, dive, and accelerate are not completely understood. Dependent on a color's temperature and aerosol density, it may be seen visually, either by itself generated plasma color, by reflected light, or silhouette by light blockage and background contrast. Occasionally and perhaps exceptionally, it seems a field with undetermined characteristics can exist between certain charged buoyant objects in loose formation. The intervening space between them forms an area, viewed as a shape, often triangular, from which the reflection of light does not occur. This is a key finding in the attribution of what have frequently been called black craft, often triangular and up to hundreds of feet in length. The UK Ministry of Defence. This report is interesting in many ways. Although these lights show up clearly in many videos now posted on YouTube, I wanted to ask Michael Lee Hill how he would describe them. He told me, "They are beautiful. Imagine a house-sized ball of light/plasma that is pulsating with what seems like the brightest, most intense multidimensional colors I have ever seen. They usually appear as a single orb. Then sometimes that orb will divide, or another second orb will appear next to the first. Sometimes a third orb will appear and then all three orbs will join into a huge triangle formation and create what seems to be one solid triangular craft." Amazingly enough, Wes, the UK Ministry of Defence actually has detailed the behaviour of these orbs of plasma/light perfectly. That is indeed pretty interesting, and Michael is right. The following is what the Ministry of Defence has to say about these lights, and this is a quote from the above released information from MOD. "That unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP or UFO, exist is indisputable. Credited with the ability to hover, land, take off, accelerate to astonishing velocities and vanish. They can reportedly alter their direction of flight suddenly and clearly can exhibit aerodynamics characteristics well beyond those of any known aircraft or missile, either manned or unmanned. The conditions for the initial formation and sustaining of what are apparently buoyant charged masses of plasma, which can form, separate, merge, hover, climb, dive, and accelerate are not completely understood. Dependent on a color's temperature and aerosol density, it may be seen visually, either by itself generated plasma color, by reflected light, or silhouette by light blockage and background contrast. Occasionally and perhaps exceptionally, it seems a field with undetermined characteristics can exist between certain charged buoyant objects in loose formation. The intervening space between them forms an area, viewed as a shape, often triangular, from which the reflection of light does not occur. This is a key finding in the attribution of what have frequently been called black craft, often triangular and up to hundreds of feet in length." The UK Ministry of Defence. So now we know that the exact same kind of UFOs have been seen by reliable witnesses, even the Coast Guard, over Lake Erie, Suffolk, Virginia, see the Terrell Copeland case, and the Great Britain, recorded by the Ministry of Defence. Now, are there even more places in the world where these specific types of UFOs have been sighted? Yes, there is. 2. The portal. The Hessdalen Lights phenomenon. Hessdalen is a central Norwegian small village located in a 9.3 miles, 15 kilometers, long valley. We find it approximately 75 miles south of a larger Norwegian city, Trondheim. Normally, it would have been quite an insignificant little village, with only 120 people living there, and few people in the world would have known it even existed. However, Hessdalen has been quite well known internationally for occasional occurrences of a sometimes ominous luminous phenomena called the Hessdalen Lights. The phenomena is monitored by the Hessdalen AMS Automatic Measurement Station, editor's note. These unusual lights have been reported in Hessdalen since at least back in the 1940s. However, there was a great increase in these sightings over the period of December 1981 until the summer of 1984, when people could apparently see the lights as often as 15 to 20 times a week. Then the amount of sightings decreased again to a relatively steady amount of 10 to 20 sightings a year, in average. The light people see is often bright white or yellow, compare the East Lake UFOs, and of unknown origin to the villagers and scientists. These lights are standing or floating above the ground level. And these are not just flashing lights, they can be seen, sometimes for hours at the time. Due to the increased sightings in the early 1980s, a research team nicknamed Project Hessdalen was initiated by Dr. Erling Strand in 1983. In 1988, the Hessdalen AMS, which basically is a research station, was built in the valley. It registers and records the appearance of these lights. Later, the EMBLA program was initiated. It brings together established scientists and students into researching these lights. Leading research institutions are Stfold University College, Norway, and the Italian National Research Council. So it's obvious that these lights can't be easily explained. In fact, these research institutions, after almost 30 years of steady research, have no clear idea of what these lights are. In Wikipedia, it gives us a number of bullet points, showing us what some scientists are guessing that it is. However, none of these explanations includes that the lights has some kind of higher consciousness, which is quite apparent to anyone who has ever seen them. Nothing artificial can make loops and patterns like that. There are those who would object and say that nothing we know of could make patterns like that, but the thing is that anyone who is objective to start with will see that these lights are moving around by consciousness. I haven't watched them on site, but it's enough to watch them on videos to be able to tell. I took a snapshot of the video, only 40 seconds into it. Where have we seen this exact formation before? That's right, over Lake Erie. No doubt about it. I snapped this one in the precise moment when the lights created the famous triangular formation. One of the remarks a professor does is, where is the power cord, where is the fuel? And he is nailing it down right to the point. These lights are not moving around with assistance from any known energy source, at least not to mainstream science. The video presentation, the portal, Multimedia A3 above, is a 47 minutes long video, filled with very reliable eyewitnesses that have all seen similar things. The light phenomena are changing speed, indicating no mass by physical means, and seems to be able to take on pieces of plasma or energy from the ground while passing by. The same thing has been reported regarding the East Lake UFOs. The portal continues the presentation by saying, the phenomenon seems to radiate energy, due to the light and frequent change of color. But also, some eyewitnesses have, in connection with the sightings, felt the foul smell of sulfur. Apparently, in 2004 the scientists detected the light phenomenon several times, directly above a specific sulfur mine outside the village. So this mine must be very special, says one of the interviewed locals of Hessdalen. Although these lights have been seen hovering above the sulfur mine, it's just another theory, they add. The lights do not follow any fixed pattern, and certainly don't always hover over sulfur mines. A spectral study has been done as well of the phenomenon, and it's been shown to contain oxygen, nitrogen, and silica, which in reality means air and dust. But there were also traces of the rare element of scandium, which can only be found in Scandinavia. Scandium is an extremely hard substance which can be found in the production of Soviet hydroplanes. This material is strong enough to cut through ice caps. The same material was used in Soviet fighters, and perhaps still is. The Soviets had developed high-strength weldable aluminum alloys using scandium. Now, that is interesting, because it's exactly what has been reported in the East Lake UFO sightings. Eyewitnesses have sometimes heard, sometimes seen, or both, how the UFOs have cut through the ice cap, making a massive sound. The Norwegian research team has now, as mentioned above, expanded their staff to include college students and others, because they need much more manpower to go to the bottom with this interesting phenomenon. It should be mentioned for research purposes that this phenomenon has also been observed in combination with the aurora borealis, starting out around 9:30 in the evening, figure A11. What we're seeing in the picture is the light starting out with the glowing orb to the left, moving all the way to the right, and back all the way to the left, past the start point. The distance between the far left and far right is estimated to be 10 to 15 kilometers, which is about 5 to 7 miles. The exposure time from the camera was 30 seconds. What surprises the scientists is when they look at the spectrum at the bottom, made on purpose by the camera lens, it's continuous over the spectra, from red to violet. The way the spectrum shows up indicates there is no gas or fuel that's running the engine, if any, but it certainly looks like it could be a solid object, they say, or from plasma with high density, or molecular chemical compositions. Figure A12. Nikola Tesla. At the same time, the phenomenon is registered on radar. The interesting thing with the radar readings is that the object was only seen for a few minutes, but on the radar it registered for 4 hours. A scientist that's interviewed in the video is quite curious about the phenomenon, because it acts like a ball of fire, but it doesn't expand, and in the combustion process, it should expand according to today's scientific norms. So something must be able to hold that ball of fire together, he says, like a magnetic field, like a plasmoid, a magnetic field that traps plasma and keeps it inside the volume of the orb. They are therefore looking for the mechanism that stores the energy, and why this power source is so incredibly powerful in its intensity. And what's really curious about it is that the orb can keep this plasma trapped and in a powerful density over a long duration of time. This is mainly what the scientists are now trying to find the solution to. The scientist in the interviews ends off on a positive note, saying that this mysterious way of storing energy could be something we humans may be able to use in the future instead of petrol, gas, and nuclear power. He thinks there may be in the atmosphere, a natural storing mechanism not yet understood by science. Can this become the energy source of the future? They speculate. The idea of extracting energy from thin air, or vacuum, is not new. Already in the 1920s, Nikola Tesla had discovered enormous energy potentials in what he called the flux field, or the vacuum field, by some scientists called the plenum, in other words, the 96% dark matter and energy, which in alien term is called the KHAA, meaning breath. Today, we hear about this as zero-point energy. At this point, the narrator in the video says, there is no known way to extract this kind of energy, but suggests that this may be what we are seeing over Hessdalen. Someone, or something is able to do just that, and whatever it is, it's showing us that it's doing it. Lastly, the film producer is elaborating on that this could potentially be even bigger than that. Is Hessdalen perhaps a portal to another world, or another reality? So, what is known so far about the pulsating orbs of light UFOs showing up worldwide? The following is the conclusions from over 25 years of research and after Italian SETI scientists got involved with much more sophisticated equipment. The phenomenon is identified as a bright flying object with special characteristics making it unique to science. The phenomenon is more complex and diverse than expected, indicating more than one single kind of phenomenon. The phenomenon is sometimes made up of separate units that may depart and fly away. The speed varies from still to 8 km per second. The phenomenon changes course in speeds indicating no mass by physical means. The phenomenon seems to be able to take on pieces of plasma or energy from the ground whilst passing by. The phenomenon seems to radiate energy due to the light and frequency change of color. Many interesting spectra in the optical and radio frequency range have been detected, but more data is needed to draw proper conclusions. These scientific data are quite sensational. We are dealing with a real existing phenomenon which can be observed even though this is difficult. For a layman it would be convenient to brush these phenomena off as atmospheric balls of light, which do exist and is an atmospheric phenomenon, and therefore moving back and forth on some atmospheric current, but this is not logical when we observe how the orbs move and the typical, precise formations they are taking. It's easy to see that it's not random, and therefore most likely is something controlled by some perhaps higher intelligence. 3. BAS and the Bigelow Investigator. BAS means Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, and sounds like a government organization. However, it is not. It is a company, owned by real estate billionaire Robert Bigelow of Las Vegas, Nevada. In late 2009, Robert Bigelow made a deal with MUFON, the Mutual UFOs Network, which is officially a non-profit organization which investigates UFO sightings. It is one of the largest and oldest UFO organizations in the United States. Bigelow has promised to provide MUFON with whatever they need to find actual hardcore proof of the existence of alien spacecraft, and of course, alien beings. This means, foremost, alien debris of crashed UFOs etc. For many UFO enthusiasts, this is met with both positive and negative responses. Positive in the sense that MUFON now have the funding they need to expand their investigations, and negative in the sense that some feel that MUFON is now owned by Bigelow. And MUFON has been working as an independent research group, allegedly. However, the above debate is probably not even what is the most relevant. In a policy from the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, Order Joe 7110.65U with effective date, February 9, 2012, it says under Section 8. Unidentified Flying Object, UFO, Reports. 9-8-1. General. A. Persons wanting to report UFO/unexplained phenomena activity should contact a UFO/unexplained phenomena reporting data collection center, such as Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, BAS, voice, 1-877-979-7444 or email, reporting@bas.org, the National UFO Reporting Center, etc. B. If concern is expressed that life or property might be endangered, report the activity to the local law enforcement department. This should be quite concerning for the serious UFO enthusiast and researcher, because it shows a definite link between Robert Bigelow's BAS and the federal government. So the FAA, as of February 2012, wants us to report UFO sightings to a private company, under the disguise of a very government-sounding name, similar to the Federal Reserve, which is not federal at all, but privately owned by international bankers, such as the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And of course, if we follow the trail, we find MUFON on the other side, collecting funds from Bigelow, who has his government connection. So, privacy and integrity is therefore most likely to go out the window, although I'm sure MUFON hasn't been working in public interest for many, many years. This is all, as usual, just the tiniest tip of the iceberg. So, how does Robert Bigelow come into the picture in regards to the Eastlake UFOs, which is the storyline for this paper? Well, in the midst of all happenings in Michael Lee Hill's life, he was contacted by investigator Gary Hernandez, who said he was looking into the Lake Erie phenomenon. In August of 2010, Hernandez sent a message on Michael's Facebook page, inquiring about what Michael knew about the Eastlake UFOs. In short, they communicated some back and forth, and Michael was sharing some information with the investigator, because he wanted the story to come out in the open as much, and as soon as possible. In November, curiously enough, investigator Hernandez, in a Facebook message I have in my possession, told Michael there were certain things he couldn't tell him due to the nature of a contract Hernandez had signed. He added, "I don't want to disappear now," indicating that he was at great risk if he told Michael about classified things. A few days after that he wrote, "In regards to BAS, I am the only investigator who has been revealed through the Isles of Capri, FLA, Niagara Falls, Canada, the Lake Erie incident and the skinwalkerranch.org website was emphasis under who's sick involved. It just so happened that I was an aggressive investigator and was written about often. If the report is viewed by the screeners I will be identified. I would like to speak about it, but we must keep BAS out of it, for it is a keyword in the system." Apparently, Hernandez wanted to keep the Skinwalker Ranch in low profile as well, breaking up the web address in several parts, see bold emphasis above. We will discuss that place a little bit as well in a moment, but first, let's see what he meant when he was telling Michael about being the aggressive investigator. Let's back up a little bit. Eugene Ehrlich of Cleveland, Ohio, had filmed some UFOs over Lake Erie, and the media got involved in the case, just like it had with Michael Lee Hill. So MUFON thought they should get involved as well, and sent an investigator named Tom Wertman to the sighting spot. MUFON's conclusion over what they saw was planet Venus, but they changed their minds, saying that what Ehrlich had filmed was aircraft coming in and out over Lake Erie from Hopkins Cleveland International Airport. Investigator Wertman allegedly had spoken to traffic controllers at the airport, but no references or names were disclosed. This event has been documented by Lon Strickler on his blogspot. Strickler continues to report that both Ehrlich and Hill simultaneously had filmed the same UFO event over the lake, without any knowledge of each other. Both were then presenting their material on the Alien Agenda radio show. A few days later, on April 8, 2010, Ehrlich was called by someone who introduced himself as an investigator from Bass, something which was later confirmed as being correct. The caller introduced himself, and although Strickler doesn't mention him by name, the investigator was Gary Hernandez. Hernandez then demanded that Ehrlich gave him the exact coordinates where the sighting had taken place, and when Ehrlich started questioning the caller, Hernandez told him that these lights were not of terrestrial origin, but alien, and that there was big money involved in trying to get this technology. Ehrlich then hung up the phone. Ehrlich didn't have any particular problem, allegedly, to talk to MUFON or some other UFO investigative organization, but like Strickler says, when someone calls, being quite aggressive, and demanding information from the witness, it is indeed time to question the motives of the caller. So, Hernandez is calling both Ehrlich and Hill to investigate the sighting, and he reveals to the first that this is alien technology that we are seeing in the skies above the lake, and if he is correct, in other parts of the world, too, and that there is a lot of money invested in this. And indeed, although he seems to have had more cold feet when talking to Michael, in the beginning of their communication he hinted at the same thing, saying, and I quote, "In regards to the lights over Lake Erie, I am not absolutely convinced that they are coming from conventional aircraft. As an investigator I must be completely objective with any UFO reports which has had multiple witnesses. Bass employees are paid professionals, all the investigators are formal law enforcement detectives who have a higher level set of skills and experience. MUFON takes anyone who pays the money and passes the test and works for free. That does not make them a credible source for information for me to accept their conclusion." However, as time went by and he apparently got more confident with Michael, he told Michael that they knew what the Lake Erie phenomenon is, because it is the exact thing that is happening in Hessdalen, Norway. But not only there, these objects were also flying over Utah Skinwalker Ranch, which is owned by Robert Bigelow. He said that his conclusion regarding these orbs is not that they are what people think and expect, which would be physical metal, nuts and bolts UFOs, as he put it, but instead more like portals and have to do with time travel. These were Hernandez's own words, according to Michael Lee Hill. The results from years of study at the Skinwalker Ranch was released in a book called Hunt for the Skinwalker, by Carl May, Kelleher and George Knapp. 15. I need to add the synopsis of the book here, as presented at Amazon.com. It's pretty interesting. The author of the controversial bestseller Brain Trust brings his scientific expertise to the chilling true story of unexplained phenomena on Utah's Skinwalker Ranch and challenges us with a new vision of reality. For more than 50 years, the bizarre events at a remote Utah ranch have ranged from the perplexing to the wholly terrifying. Vanishing and mutilated cattle. Unidentified flying objects. The appearance of huge, otherworldly creatures. Invisible objects emitting magnetic fields with the power to spark a cattle stampede. Flying orbs of light with dazzling maneuverability and lethal consequences. For one family, life on the Skinwalker Ranch had become a life under siege by an unknown enemy or enemies. Nothing else could explain the horrors that surrounded them, perhaps science could. Leading a first-class team of research scientists on a disturbing odyssey into the unknown, Colm Kelleher spent hundreds of days and nights on the Skinwalker property and experienced firsthand many of its haunting mysteries. With investigative reporter George Knapp the only journalist allowed to witness and document the team's work, Kelleher chronicles in superb detail the spectacular happenings the team observed personally, and the theories of modern physics behind the phenomena. Far from the coldly detached findings one might expect, their conclusions are utterly hair-raising in their implications. Opening a door to the unseen world around us, Hunt for the Skinwalker is a clarion call to expand our vision far beyond what we know. And this place is owned by billionaire Robert Bigelow. Can anybody sense a bigger story here? For those who are interested, and I'm sure most of us are, there is an interview on YouTube with the above authors.
I'm Jerry Pippin. On the line from Las Vegas, Nevada, we have a couple of very interesting men. George Knapp, who heads the High Team. He's an investigative reporter for KLAS-TV out there, Channel 8, the CBS affiliate. And also we have an interesting fellow who now lives in California, but did live in Las Vegas for several years, Dr. Colm Kellner. And he headed NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Sciences, at one time. They've written a book, a very interesting read, called Hunt for the Skinwalker. And so let's go ahead and talk to these two. First of all, let's talk to George. George Knapp, Mandalay Bay last night had a very interesting sign. You were there, a star, right there on the Las Vegas Strip for the book signing last night. I guess we can say you have arrived.
Yeah, that's a kick, isn't it? I think that's the only chance I'm going to get up on a marquee.
This is kind of a new experience for you, right?
It is a new experience. It's a little bit unsettling. You know, as a journalist, Jerry, you can relate to this. You feel a little bit uncomfortable in going out and hawking some wares, so to speak. But Colm Kelleher and I are pretty proud of the work that we've done on this book. And it's not perfect by any means, but we think we've advanced the cause.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Hunt for the Skinwalker in detail here in a minute, and also maybe you can put Dr. Keller on before it's over as well. You know, this is an interesting avenue. I remember the series you did for KLAS-TV on this. I had no idea you were doing a book.
Well, actually, I had written a couple of articles for a Las Vegas weekly newspaper back at the end of 2002, and the story had really been driving me crazy because Dr. Kelleher and my other friends from NIDS had been cluing me in on this stuff for a number of years, with the understanding that I would not be able to make it public in any way until they gave me permission. Well, I kept bugging them for some time, and eventually in the end of 2002, they allowed me to go ahead and proceed with those articles for the primary reason of seeing what kind of a reaction it generated and whether we could get some leads on additional hotspots, paranormal hotspots around the country. And there was so much interest in those two articles that I tried to go back to NIDS and see if we could do some other things. At the time, they weren't interested in that because they were worried about intrusion at the Skinwalker Ranch property by outsiders. Eventually, though, I wore them down, and Colm and I started working on the book.
Yeah, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about this whole situation up there in Utah? It's a pretty far out story, but it's at the same time, as you say, it's one of the better paranormal tales I've heard, and evidently you were there and you can witness. You waited around there in the chair one time waiting for this thing and got a mosquito bite, and that was about it, huh?
Yeah, I'll tell you that story in a second. First, the overview about the ranch. This is a 480-acre picturesque property in northeastern Utah, and it's idyllic. It's a beautiful setting. It looks like a great place to have a ranch, except for its long history of paranormal activity. And in the book, we sort of, it's like a laundry list of strange things, strange phenomena, including UFOs of a variety of different kinds, Bigfoot sightings, poltergeist-type activity, cattle mutilations, weird animals, everything you can name, all wrapped up in one place. Now, this part of northeastern Utah, the Uinta Basin, has been the site of a phenomenal amount of UFO activity for the past 50, 60 years, and perhaps even longer than that. However, the epicenter of the basin activity seems to be this property. The Ute tribe, which lives just directly adjacent to the property and has been there for hundreds of years, refers to this particular ranch as a place where it's the path of the Skinwalker, they call it, meaning that an evil skinwalker, a shape-shifting witch of some sort, lives on that property, and they advise their tribal members to stay away from it as a result.
Now the Indians, they seem to think it was probably a medicine man gone berserk or something.
Well, like I said, skinwalker being an evil witch or a shapeshifter, but I think that's sort of the blanket explanation, the umbrella explanation that the tribe has developed over the years for all the strange, the wide variety of strange things that they have seen occur on that particular property, and sort of their blanket explanation for it. We know it now as a lot of different kinds of paranormal activity. I'm sure that there is enough of different kinds of paranormal activity that we're going to get all kinds of people heat from all sorts of different directions. The ghost people won't like the UFO people, and the UFO people hate the Bigfoot people, and they're not going to be comfortable all being thrown into the same pot. But that just is where the evidence led us.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned that, and over the years, I've come to the conclusion that there might be a connection between Bigfoot legends and UFO legends.
Well, that's sort of where the book heads, is that we look at what the possible explanations that would encompass all this different kind of activity would be. You know, normally you and I, guys like you and I, Jerry, we kick around ideas about UFOs and we think of extraterrestrials or the traditional space aliens. That's really not an explanation that works for all the stuff that we saw here at the ranch. There certainly were UFOs, but we saw no indication that they really came from some other planet. They're definitely alien, but where they're from, we're not sure.
Now, what did you actually see while you were up there? You've been up there several times.
I've been up there 4 different times. Mostly I went up to tag along with Dr. Kelleher and the other NIDS team members, and to interview them, for them to show me where all the events had occurred, to document what I could, hopefully to go out on these night watches that characterize the works of NIDS up there over several years, and to see what we could see. Now, by the time I got up there, which my first visit was in 2002, the activity had peaked. In fact, the activity probably peaked in 1997, a couple of years after NIDS had been there. But perhaps you should probably talk to Dr. Kelleher about that.
Yeah, I want to find out, and I will talk to him about maybe his explanation of why it ceased. It's kind of interesting. I also find it seems kind of interesting that NIDS would be that involved in it. They bought the property, didn't they?
They sure did. There was a single, the ranch family that had been there for a couple of years, finally, out of desperation, allowed a news reporter to do a story about it. The story was picked up on Associated Press and made its way here to Las Vegas. So Robert Bigelow, the businessman that's from Las Vegas, saw the story, got his team together, flew up to Utah, met with the rancher, and pretty much on the spot bought the property, and moved his team of scientists where they spent the next 7 years studying every inch of the property, running down every lead, investigating every paranormal activity, every cattle mutilation, every incident, interviewing everyone who lived in the area. It's really an unprecedented scientific study because, you know, UFOs, you look at UFOs, they're here 1 minute, they're a light in the sky, and they're gone, and you don't see them in the same area again. This is an area that had multiple kinds of paranormal activity over a long period of time, and it presented a unique opportunity for scientists to do some real hard work. And Mr. Bigelow and NIDS, that's exactly what they did. And for a 7-year period, they in essence had a cone of silence over the property, and were not releasing information about what they found for some very logical and reasonable reasons, is because they really didn't know what the heck they had.
I remember at one time there was evidently a lot of concern that maybe a lot of people would go up there and disturb whatever was happening. I think you even cautioned it in one of those articles for the weekly newspaper there.
There had been a number of intrusions over the years. I mean, the story about the ranch had gotten out. The real names of the ranch family had gotten out. NIDS was doing its best to try to protect the family from any further intrusions. And in addition, you know, there's really some questions about the interactive nature of this phenomena. Whatever this thing was, it's some kind of an intelligence. It seemed to have an interactive relationship with the people on the ranch and with the researchers, and it seemed to at times anticipate what people on the ranch would do. And so, naturally, a scientist doesn't want intrusions by a lot of uninvited guests who might upset that balance, whatever that balance is, at a time when everyone was working so hard to try to figure out what this thing was. So, yeah, we didn't want a lot of people running around up there. They've still done it to some extent. There are still intrusions here and there over the years. A lot of people who camp outside of the property to see what they can see. But I think they probably get a little bit tired of it because, A, the activity has decreased so much over the past couple of years, and B, even from the best vantage point, they...
But as far as Michael Lee Hill goes, the Bigelow part of the story doesn't end here. After Hernandez had contacted Ehrlich, and Hill as well, he got a phone call from the Alien Agenda radio program, he told Michael. The caller asked Hernandez, "Why are you contacting Lake Erie UFO witnesses? Didn't MUFON already state case closed, that they were just airplanes?" The conclusion I must come to, in regards to what we have discussed in this section, is that MUFON, Robert Bigelow, and the U.S. government are working together to cover up the real agenda behind investigating the Lake Erie phenomenon, which in fact is worldwide. Their real agenda, on a lower top level of the shadow government, is again to research nanotechnology, because that's where the future is. Like one of my sources once said, those who control the nano world are in control of the universe. This is big, much bigger than people think. The biggest investments will be in the smallest of worlds, the super subquantum, or the nano world. And those who know what they are doing, and why, will achieve what they want, using any means to get it. Those who have read this whole series of papers, of which this is the appendix, know what I'm talking about.